Hello everyone and welcome to another LDE webinar. Today we have Michael Fullerton presenting. Michael is Director of Quality and Clinical Care for CMG. Michael is also a registered learning disability nurse and has the clinical responsibility of care for people with learning disabilities and autism at the Care Management Group. And now I leave you with Michael presenting Transgender Support, People with Learning Disabilities and/or Autism.
Thank you, Mariana. Good morning, everyone. So, I'm Michael Fullerton, and I am a learning disability nurse. And I oversee clinical and quality support in Care Management Group, or CMG, as it's more widely known. So if you don't know about CMG, we support adults with learning disabilities and/or autism in supported living services, residential services, and outreach support, predominantly in South East England and South Wales. And we currently support just over 900 people, well, 931 people to be precise. So obviously in supporting adults with learning disabilities and/or autism to have an ordinary life, we need to focus on really personal aspects of people's lives. And that means in a supported environment that we need to often consider how we support people to navigate friendships, personal relationships, their sexual needs and rights, and sexual and gender identity. I'm seeing more people referred into CMG services who are transgender or are considering transitioning. And in terms of the numbers of people we support in this regard, it's a tiny proportion of people. So that's really 5 people, or 0.54%. So it's a really small number of people that we're thinking about. But regardless of that fact, for each of those people, this reality often means the person is in frequent emotional turmoil. It has a dramatic impact on their family life. They're often subjected to ridicule, discrimination, and turmoil. And this has a massive impact on their social life and friendships. So while myself and others in the clinical team in CMG have been focused on supporting people with sexual education and well-being, we have not focused enough on the support to people who have or are considering transgendering. So we're determined to change that, and ultimately for the people that we support, but also we need to be very mindful that the supporting staff working directly with those individuals really need good support and guidance to fulfill their role well. So what we're doing currently is developing a transgender support guide with Change, our human rights organization. And as a leading charity, among other work, they produce some excellent easy read resources. And together we are developing a new guide which should be available in a couple of months from now. Some of you might know that last year we developed a booklet focused on keeping safe online, and this is freely available on CMG's website. To develop the transgender support guide, we work closely with people that we support in CMG, a small number of our registered managers, Change, and Persia West. Now, Persia is a writer based in Brighton, and she consults on diversity and human rights, and she is a trans woman. That is, she's transitioned from a man to a woman. She kindly agreed to consult for the group to ensure we can develop a very broad and practical guide for people with learning disabilities and/or autism, which will also be useful for families or supporting staff. So why is this so important? There are known to be higher rates of mental health difficulties for people with learning disabilities and/or autism, in particular anxiety and depression. In the trans community, one study in the UK found that 34 6.4% of trans adults had attempted suicide at least once, and almost 14% had attempted suicide more than twice. It's quite significant. This higher rate of suicide is related to experience of discrimination, stigma, transphobia, and bullying. So that when people who are neurotypical or don't have a learning disability struggle to cope, what does that mean for those who are learning disabled or autistic? This really can be a matter of life or death. So I wanted to think really practically, how do we support people who are trans, non-binary, gender fluid, etc.? I don't know figures for people with learning disabilities, but in terms of adolescents with gender dysphoria, DeVries in 2010 found that 7.8% were autistic, and similarly among adults attending gender identity clinics, 5.5% were autistic. Adolescence is a stage in life which is difficult and confusing for many of us, and that includes young people with learning disabilities, probably even more so. So we need to separately attempt to understand and support both the person's sexual identity and gender identity. And that confusing could be a confused state of identity, that the person would prefer to transition to another gender, but simply that the person is experimenting and trying to figure out who they are. Some people with autism might have difficulty feeling connected with their physical selves and may not be physically comfortable with their own body. It's difficult to try and explain how you're feeling when you don't have a solid sense of self. I'd like to offer a short case study. So in CMG, a few years ago, we supported a man with a moderate learning disability. Sadly, he has since passed away in his 50s. Now, I wasn't clinically involved, but knew the man quite well. And I remember having several conversations with the manager and pressing that we honed in on his gender identity. He was known to enjoy wearing nail varnish and talk about wearing women's clothing. And for example, if going to a high street shop, he would gravitate towards the female clothes section. So while his support team were comfortable supporting him to apply nail varnish in the privacy of his own home, neither they or the person's parents wanted to even discuss the possibility that he might wear women's clothing. So he never did in the whole of his adult life have these opportunities, and he really should have had the opportunity to explore his true thoughts and feelings. So lessons learned is that we absolutely must make sure we listen and respond to what people tell us, and not just in the words, but by their actions as well. So for this person, there were lots of wasted opportunities. Another case study is more recent. This is a young person in her early 20s and diagnosed with autism and gender identity disorder. She was born male and identifies as a female now. Her family have been working at accepting this change, but sometimes continue to refer to her by her former male name. This person is quite clear now on her gender identity, but throughout her teens, she struggled with bullying at a mainstream school. Then she moved to specialist education, experienced bullying there, and ended up being tutored at home. She was admitted to hospital under the Mental Health Act due to suicide attempts and deliberate self-harm, where she'd been experiencing significant anxiety and depression, really feeling that she's bad and wrong. Her self-confidence really low still. So for example, at home, she won't have any mirrors in the house so that she can't see herself. She's now living in a supported living service, and the support team are working in a really respectful way, really nurturing, and she's now attending the gender identity clinic and her removal clinic. And she started treatment to suppress her testosterone and due to start estrogen soon. So it'll take some time for her to not feel bad or wrong, but she'll need skilled and respectful support all along the way from everyone close to her. So the key protective factors for her and for other people in her situation will be access to good and understanding support, strong relationships with family and friends, good community support. So the community networks, if people are attending college, day centres, going to work, all that community needs to be quite supportive. And of course, really important for people to have a focus on increased self-esteem, self-awareness, and the ability to develop good coping skills and resilience. So in terms of practicals, in terms of what goes and what doesn't go, we need to think about the language that we use and try and understand the language that is used within the trans community. So within the booklet we're developing, we're going to sort of, define lots of this terminology and break it down so it's easy for people with learning disabilities and for autism to understand. But there's lots of terminology, trans man, for example, so that's sort of when a female is transitioning to a male, trans woman, transitioning from male to female, and there's other terms like gender fluid, passing, etc. So I think I'll touch on those later on. So yeah, one of the reasons for developing the transgender support booklet will be to make sure that people with learning disabilities and or autism have got really good and clear information. And thinking about people themselves, when I've had discussions with people in the trans community, people just want to be referred to in terms of their current gender identity. So, for example, he or she, and indeed, people just want to be referred to as their name. So, and when it comes to ticking a box, they would prefer to tick other or prefer not to say. So what people have told me in terms of what they don't like is terms like tranny, which are regarded as disrespectful. So a good rule of thumb really is to ask the person how they would like to be referred. So when people are going off and starting this journey on transition, it's normal to feel terrible and terrified. It's a real shock, and it's hard for the person to predict how the world around them will react. So for people with learning disabilities and or autism, there are also many power or control imbalances in their life anyway. So deciding to come out could be much more difficult than for other people. And having their decisions acknowledged and respected can be a bit of a gamble as well. Someone we support said that the trans community is 20 or 30 years behind the gay community in terms of being accepted and respected. And the same person, a trans woman, enjoys experimenting with makeup at home, but takes it off when leaving the house as she doesn't feel ready to face the public with her makeup yet. So starting off and coming out is just the start of one hell of a roller coaster ride for people. And then, of course, there are cultural and religious barriers that can place immense psychological pressure on the person and their relationship with family and social networks. So it's not simply a case of buying a new wardrobe or thinking about surgery to solve your problems. It's going to be an emotional minefield for the person for many years or much of their life, so they need all the support they can get. Someone I spoke to described feeling like in-betweeners. So there's like a fundamental shift of identity, which can be bewildering. And during that in-between stage, you're like swimming between two islands and not quite sure which way you're swimming and where you'll end up. But you can only really know who you are by going on that journey. So you absolutely need good people around you and to be healthy and strong yourself. Really important is the need to develop self-acceptance and to be patient with others. Not everyone in the family or friendship network will be able to accept such a change quickly. So, for example, your dad might be quite accepting, but your granddad might not. So you need to be patient and allow people time to come to terms with this change. Mentioned the term passing earlier. So passing is a term that refers to being able to pass yourself off in the gender you're presenting as. So this can be a bit more difficult for trans women. So when you're transitioning from male to female, when you have to be more mindful of possibly a masculine voice, facial hair, potentially a muscular or stocky build. So with a person I know, starting off by marching down the high street in a wedding dress, high heel boots and stubble isn't the best way to pass off as a female. So in terms of some practical things that you need to sort out, like hair. So thinking about facial hair in men, removal can be incredibly painful and enduring numerous sessions and quite costly as well. Laser treatment, I understand, is best for dark facial hair on pale skin. Well, electrolysis might be better for lighter hair. And of course, when you start hormone therapy, then perhaps estrogen will help weaken the body hair, which can be helpful to reduce hair on the arms, for example. For trans men, facial hair should establish when testosterone treatment gets going, with all the benefits such as body hair, voice breaking, and so on. Hair on your head should simply be a matter of experimentation with advice from friends. So for trans men, styling at the barbers should do the trick, while for trans women, growing longer hair, trying on wigs, or simply restyling may be enough. But really key thing is sort of linking in with good friends. The voice, it's really important to work on and master a voice in order to pass successfully. And so that's easier for some people than others. You can practice through voice coaching, or there's quite a lot of YouTube voice coaching as well for transgender. So, for example, if you're English, it'd be best to go for English clips rather than American, unless of course you are American. So important to work on the voice. With clothing, trans women tend to have the biggest challenges, and with female friends, it's worth experimenting. Again, this is in the same way as a teenage girl will check out what suits over time. So mistakes will be made, but that's normal. One person we support had a preference to wearing a wedding dress down the high street on a frequent basis, so we were able to convince her not to, and actually sort of found out that there are specific themed trans evenings at a local hotel where trans can meet and dress up in wedding dresses, ball gowns, etc. So it's really worth linking in with the local trans scene as well. So for example, with those events, you could go to the event dressed in your ball gown, or change while you're there and then change back before you leave. Toilets and changing rooms can be a difficulty and don't really need to be, but basically you have the right to use the facilities that match your gender presentation. It's generally best to be pragmatic about it to avoid unnecessary conflict. So like if you're midway through a male to female transition, you know, maybe you haven't quite got your hair right or your dress right and still got a bit of a stubble. So it might be that you want to stick to disabled toilets for now. One person I know has a radar key and uses this when out and about because that makes them feel more comfortable about it. I know a trans man, so that's somebody who went from female to male. He lives in quite a small town, often goes to the local pub. He is a regular and gets on well with the other regulars, and is generally accepted until it comes to using the toilet. So that's when the landlord insists he doesn't use the male toilets. So now, especially bearing in mind that this is someone who has fully transitioned, he could have made a fuss and demanded his rights, but he decided to accept that. So being part of the community was more important to him. So sometimes compromises can be made. But I think longer term, we'll see more unisex toilets and changing facilities, so that will be less of an issue. Thinking about names, so I guess the less outrageous, the better. Indeed, I know someone who considers themselves to be gender fluid or non-binary. So that is that they don't particularly identify either as a man or a woman, and sometimes sort of drift between the two. And his name could be considered male or female, so he's sticking with that, which is quite handy sometimes. Obviously, people just want to be called the name they choose to be referred to. So in a group supported accommodation, all the support team will need to use the person's preferred name and support the other people who live there to understand the name change and to use that also. So for some people with a learning disability under autism, that could take longer than others. So perhaps something like a social story could help with understanding. A couple of people that we support have changed their name by deed poll. So I also understand that people can make a statutory declaration, which is easier to achieve. But either way, both offer a legal means of changing your name. If you're supporting someone if you support somebody who may need support with things like interacting with the post office or passport office, benefits office, etc., all of their health professionals, to ensure that everybody who needs to know the name change is informed. It's really important. So there are all these various social transitions. Also really important for many people are medical transitions. So people need to think about making decisions around hormonal treatment and surgery. Always the starting point is going to your GP and seeking a referral. So with hormone treatment, you're going to end up going through like a second puberty. So for trans men, they're transitioning from a testosterone-based body to an estrogen-based body. So the hormone will make the body react differently. So for example, the estrogen-based body will help feminize the body with lighter facial hair, body hair, fat distributed on the hips, etc. There's a really good resource, which actually I forgot to add into the slide, called A Guide to Hormone Therapy for Trans People. It's from the NHS. It's a little bit old. This was written in 2007, but still relevant and worth a read to have a really good understanding of the different hormones treatments and the benefits and sort of potential risks. Person I mentioned earlier, Persia West, who's the writer and consultant that has helped CMG, told me that when first taking estrogen, that within a few weeks she started to feel more at home, as she put it. And longer term, it's had lots of benefits. So for example, making her skin softer, which helps with passing as well. So obviously people may have a choice about whether to go for surgery or not. To go through this will require good physical and mental stability, as the process is quite tough. And I know someone who was delayed because there were times when he was drinking heavily, too overweight, or going through bouts of depression. So it's not easy. It takes a long time. And of course, not everyone wants to or needs to go ahead with this. So I just go back to the hormone therapy. It's possible to buy hormones online. So people with learning disabilities and or autism may be tempted to go down that route, especially if they're being quite impatient. So always advised to encourage people to go through the usual route of a GP prescription so you can trust what you're taking. I'm not going to go into detail about surgery here, but the Gender Identity Clinic websites, such as Tavistock in London, are really good places to find out more. Social support, really important. So basically, I think many areas are quite well resourced now for support within the mainstream trans community. if you can call it mainstream, as it's a minority group. So for people with a learning disability and or autism, it's a minority group within a minority group. But some places are better than others. I think generally very welcoming of all people. The group that I know best is the Clare Project in Brighton, and they tell me that in recent years they've had more contacts and interest from people with autism than ever before. In terms of social supports, Supported Loving have started to run some social groups for people with learning disabilities who are LGBT. That's only in specific areas, but worth checking it out. They have a really good Facebook and Twitter page, and you'll find them also through Choice Support website. It's run by the brilliant Claire Bates, so really worth checking out. Family support. Families, in my experience, need a lot of support, but it's sadly lacking. I know in our experiences, we've had to be a support mechanism for the family, as well as the person that we're supporting, with support from the care manager. Hopefully got some health professionals involved as well who can support both the person and the family, but there's not much support available really for families. And can be very difficult for our family members, whether it's parents, grandparents, siblings, etc., to get the head around now referring to my daughter instead of my son, my brother instead of my sister, etc. So it's quite a difficult issue for people. I've listed just a small number of support links here. There's a few more and very easy to Google these. Basically, if you can support people to link in with local networks, get some face-to-face contact going, then this is most helpful. So just have a look around. Some people would prefer to check out what's available online, but if you can encourage people to get some face-to-face contact, it's much more beneficial, although difficult for some people on the autism spectrum particularly. In terms of legal protection for trans people, I think these are the key acts: the Gender Recognition Act 2004, Equality Act 2010, and the Human Rights Act 1998. There's a real drive to review the Gender Recognition Act, so while it was really helpful when it came out, it still lacks some key measures that the trans community want to see in place. So, for example, to recognise non-binary identities and to make it easier to get a gender recognition certificate. Not much available in the way of easy read information. So I've got a link there. What is Transgender information booklet for people with learning disabilities? And well, between CMG and Change, we will be developing a new booklet soon, which will be coming out, I would imagine, in a couple of months from now. And like I say, we'll have that available freely on our website. So that's it from me, really, barring questions and answers. So I thank you very much for listening. And is there any questions from anyone or any comments? Any more information?
If you can please explain what a gender recognition certificate is.
Okay, that's a document that legally changes your gender. So it allows you to state your correct gender, and that can be put on your birth certificate. So at this stage, you need to have a medical diagnosis of gender dysphoria and be able to prove that you've lived as your acquired gender for the last 2 years to gain one.
Somebody wants to know, what is the difference between gender identity disorder and gender dysphoria?
They're the same thing, really. So I know one person we support with an autism diagnosis has specified as a diagnosis a gender identity disorder. That's the former name of gender dysphoria. So it's commonly known as gender dysphoria now rather than identity disorder.
Okay, we've got another question here. This is from Claire. She wants to know, what advice would you give to a manager struggling with a non-supportive staff team in this area? And she also wants to thank you for your shout out about supported living.
Pleasure, Claire. That's a tricky one. I think generally people who are trans tend to face prejudice, discrimination, and a lack of awareness wherever they go, and that could include actually the people supporting them. In my experience so far in CMG, we haven't actually encountered any difficulties. People have been really accepting, and we haven't had any problems either with people that we support who are trans or employees who are trans. So that's really good. I think if there was someone who's having difficulties, I would be spending quite a bit of time sitting down with a person and just talking it through and talking about our organizational values and how they fit it with our attitudes to the people that we're supporting. For the people that we support, and also for our staff teams, there's a lot of diversity, whether it relates to race, culture, sexuality, etc. So gender identity should be no different. So yeah, I would have a lot of conversations with the person to try and overcome that.
Thank you, Michael. We have a question here from Lucy. She says, thank you, that this was very useful, that they are a friendship and dating agency for people with learning disabilities and to have LGBT support and social group. One question she has is in regards to the checkbox for male or female. They were advised by Lancashire LGBT to have male, female, transgender options. But she said, did you say people prefer not to use this?
Yeah, well, I think, I'm only talking about small numbers of people here. But yeah, a couple of people I spoke to who would like to be regarded as being gender fluid or non-binary would prefer another option where it's just other or just prefer not to say. So yeah, I think I'm not quite sure. Generally, I think in some legal documents there is some opportunities to not express a gender.
Okay, Michael, we've got another comment. This is from Adam. And Adam from Walsingham says, first of all, thank you very much for creating a booklet. And he wanted to mention Dr. Wen Lawson, who has done fantastic work to understand the link between autism and transgender identity and has contributed to safeguarding on this area. He wanted to know if you are working with him, and do you know of any resources that exist to deal with difficult family members who don't want their child or family member to transition?
Well, firstly, yeah, I think in terms of Wen Lawson's work, I think there's some really good stuff going on there, and it's a good point, Adam. So it's a really good source of information. perhaps I should have made reference to it in the presentation as well. So yeah, that's really useful. Within the gender identity clinics, they have a range of resources and information which are helpful both for people who are considering transitioning, but also for families who are unclear or confused, etc. But ultimately, some families or members of a family might have real difficulty in coming to terms with that. I think what's required often is a lot of patience, and some people may take a long time to come to terms. So the more support available, the better. But I think in terms of resources, other people might have other ideas, but gender identity clinics or accessing resources from local trans groups, really useful. The Clare project in Brighton that I have contact with, they've got some really good resources, and they're really happy to talk to people who are thinking about transitioning, or family members as well. So there's pockets of really good support, but it is a difficult one.
Thank you, Michael, for that brilliant presentation and for taking the time to share your experience and knowledge with us. We would also like to thank everyone for participating in this session and hope you have enjoyed it and found the information discussed useful. We look forward to seeing you at our next session in the near future. Bye from now from LGE.